Hi, everyone. I'm Meteorologist Royal Norman, and this is Sonoran Sky, a podcast of the First Alert Weather Team at Arizona's family. And we like to deal with a lot of the topics around Arizona, including one of my favorites, which is water, which means that rivers are one of my favorites as well. And we're going to be talking with Kim Schonek, who's from the Nature Conservancy, about a little river down in southern Arizona called the San Pedro that maybe never even ever got its due even way back in the day because its big father, the Santa Cruz, fed Tucson, and that's where the interstate runs, I-19. But the San Pedro is this beautiful, charming, well, I don't know. It's just a really cool place in Arizona that I love, and we're going to talk a little bit about the San Pedro. Kim Schonek, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming along to do this. Now, obviously, I like the San Pedro. You love the San Pedro because you work on it and you're figuring out all the kind of stuff that happens on the San Pedro. First of all, a little bit of history. Here's what I know about the San Pedro. It starts in Mexico, about 10, 12 miles, and it goes all the way up to the Gila River and connects there. But what about the history of the San Pedro? Has it always been a place where civilization has sort of been?
Yeah, the history of the San Pedro is long, and of course, in an arid place like Arizona, rivers have always been a gathering place and a place where people go. So we have documentation of habitation in the San Pedro River for well over 12,000 years. So one of the really cool places on the river that I like is near the Lanier kill site for mammoths. So, there's a lot of history along the river and looking at even old sites like the kill sites, the kivas, all of the things we see along the river that we know people were there and using that place.
So humans were using it for a long time, just as they were the Santa Cruz, these two rivers that kind of made a corridor up north into Arizona. And do you think that one of them was more important back in the day? Because again, the Santa Cruz we know a lot more about than the San Pedro, but were they sort of equal importance?
I don't think we don't really know, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think people use them differently, and they were migration paths for animals. They really created that central place for life to sustain itself. So I wouldn't say one is more important than the other, even now.
All right. I did want to ask about that because I do know that these river systems in southern Arizona, aren't they the places that help animals connect to the sky islands of the southern portion of the state?
Yeah, so we see these big sky islands kind of dotted across the landscape, and the rivers that flow, south to north, those make up ways for animals to move north to south, but they also move east to west across these rivers. And so these are great places to stop and get a drink and rest and cool off on your way up into the mountains. So, the rivers, the seeps, the springs, the cienagas, all of those freshwater habitats that dot southern Arizona make up that large landscape that is the Sky Islands.
And so that's part of what it plays today and is important today about. What are some of the other things that the San Pedro is important for all of us today, including animals?
Yeah, so the San Pedro River, recreation is very critical there. In 1988, Congress designated the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, SPRNCA. That is a 40-mile stretch of the river where you can hike and bike, bird watch, and really enjoy just being out there in nature. But it's also connected to a lot of the aquifers that make up our drinking water supply for communities like Sierra Vista and Tombstone, as well as Fort Huachuca. So really important critical water supply, but also just recreation and cultural way of being.
So I started to ask you this question before we got going, and you started answering. I said, well, no, this is going to be a good answer. Don't answer. So I read a thing just recently that said in the year 2020, and we're going to talk about dry versus wet mapping, that 38% of, and this is a river, by the way, that is always not, correct me if I'm wrong, unless there's storm runoff or snow runoff or whatever, normally the San Pedro doesn't run along 100% of its course, correct?
So it does not currently run along
Right.
100% of its course.
Okay,
Nope.
so in 2020 they said it was running around 38% of its course, and now it's about 22% of its course. Is that accurate, and what are we to make of that?
So it's important to understand the background of that science. So the Nature Conservancy has been mapping the San Pedro River since 1999 as part of a citizen science project. And so each year we have volunteers go out and they map what is wet and what is dry. And so I came from the Northwest. So when I learned that we were going to go out and we were going to map this river, right? Like, well, what's wet, what's dry? So we actually have to define that for partners. And we map the sections that are wet, the sections that are dry. And so that percentage of wet is really the percentage that we mapped that year.
Okay.
So without getting into all the details, it's not necessarily a one-to-one that we map the same number of miles those years. But we do see a trend over time. When we have very prolonged drought, as we've been in for the last 20 years, we see less wetted length of river. And particularly that stretch from the US border down into the first, 5 or 6 miles of the river is very dry. And so we don't want to make the wrong conclusions, but we also know that drought is definitely affecting this critical river system.
Yeah, indeed it is. And I've seen some pictures of the mapping process, people doing the mapping. And I'll make this distinction for folks. You don't count mud. You don't count mud. There's got to be actually water. Even if it's like a 12-foot long puddle, that counts as water in the riverbed, correct?
That's correct. Anything more than 3 feet.
Oh,
So if we see a 3 foot section of water, then we count that.
yeah.
If it's less than that, we don't count it. And that is because our GPS units have a range of accuracy. And so we want to be as accurate as we can.
So yeah, so mud doesn't count. It's got to be water
Correct.
that's flowing there. So that brings us to a question that's really interesting and is being learned about all around the state by water experts. And it's this thing that when I got my college education, not even going to tell you, Kim, how long ago that was. But there was surface water law in the West and there was groundwater law in the West, and never the two would meet. Well, they're meeting now because we have better science. And we know that groundwater impacts surface water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now down along the San Pedro, we are finding that groundwater and the impacts of using groundwater is impacting this river. Is that correct?
Yeah, so groundwater use is undoubtedly impacting our freshwater systems. And we need to understand how much impact does it have? What can we do to mitigate and minimize that impact? So, we've been involved in so many different projects where we want to slow water down on the landscape, allow it time to sink in. And we can do that on a broad, diverse landscape, or we can do it in really concentrated areas like the Cochise County Recharge Network work. And so that's really focused on getting more water in the ground close to the river so that we can buffer those stream flows and protect that riparian corridor that's absolutely critical to the river.
But
And so oh, go ahead.
no, sorry, I interrupted, but I was going to say, but the pressures are increasing. The pressures from Fort Huachuca, the pressures from growth. How do we mitigate that versus, this precious river that we have in southern Arizona?
Collaboration and science.
Mhm.
It's absolutely essential. And so we do know that the fort has a water demand, and so does the fort. And the fort has invested a wide range of resources into minimizing that use. Communities like Sierra Vista have converted to low water use features. They are looking at how do they deliver water as efficiently as possible. Programs like our Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, WIFA, provided water conservation grant funds to reduce outdoor water use, to have sprinkler timers, to things like replacing meters to get rid of leaks. So there's a wide range of things we can do to reduce our water use. So growth does not always equal more water use. So when we look at trends over time, we see people making responsible choices and being able to reduce their water use. And so those are the kinds of things we need to do to be able to reduce that use over time. And then we need to mitigate that impact by putting more water in the ground and using our effluent wisely to recharge our aquifers.
Yeah, I want to get back to effluent in just a second, but first, to me, it was kind of stunning news. Tell me if it was stunning to you that one of the wells that was put in, I believe, in the 1980s to monitor the groundwater around the San Pedro, actually the water has dropped below the depth of that well. That was, tell me your reaction to that.
I think I think understanding what was the depth of the wells and where is that located is
Hmm.
absolutely important.
Okay.
And so I'm not that familiar with that specific project.
Okay.
And so it really depends, what else is happening in that area. And what do we need to be doing broadly? So, where we have monitoring wells very close to the river, we have seen different wells have more water, other wells have less water. So it's so site specific that taking one example and saying this is, indicative of everything happening is really challenging. So I don't want to speculate on that particular well. And I think it's important to look at what is happening across that landscape. And it is undoubtedly a challenge to think about managing water in an arid landscape like we're in and protecting rivers.
Yeah, and you're right about that. Thank you. And I think there's maybe, I don't know, I'm going to get this number wrong, 12 or 13 or 14 of those wells that were put in specifically to watch the management of the San Pedro. And you're right, one is below, a couple went down, a couple came up a little bit. So you really do have to analyze the whole system in southern Arizona to get a good gauge on it. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes. Yeah, we need to look at a system level and think about how can we manage this system.
So is most of the pressure, though, you mentioned it, most of the pressure, though, on the Santa Cruz is in southern Arizona, say, Bisbee, Fort Huachuca, those areas. Not saying they're using the water, but just so people
Mhm.
know the general area of where the river is being pressured.
Yeah, so, and even in Mexico, right, we have a river that starts in Mexico. We have things like the Cananea mine. We have agriculture that is south of the border. We have Tombstone that uses water. Bisbee uses water. Sierra Vista. All of these communities are using water and have an ongoing demand. And so I think that's why they're partnering together to look for solutions.
Yeah, I love that they are working together like that. So effluent, is that one of the solutions? And I assume you're talking about effluent that's been cleaned up to a point where it can go back into a river, correct?
Yes. So effluent is highly treated wastewater.
Hmm.
So when we think about the water cycle, right, we run our taps, we flush our toilets, water goes down, it gets collected. Communities treat that to a very high standard. And then we can use that for things like recharge. So the Environmental Operations Park, EOP,
Hmm.
in Sierra Vista is a great example of recharge that's happening along the river and is creating actually a mound of water in between the town of Sierra Vista and the river. And so it allows water to flow towards the river underground and benefit that particular stretch of river. And so that's really important. There are challenges. So I know some of your listeners are thinking about what's in that water. And that's a really valid concern when we think about what's called PFAS or
Hmm.
forever chemicals.
Right.
And being able to put that water in the ground and allowing it to move slowly towards the river allows more time for what we call soil aquifer treatment. And so the more time that water's in contact with soil, the more things that get removed from that water and attached to soil. And then that allows that water to move on into the ecosystem that is a little bit more clean. So it's definitely a concern. It's something we're looking towards, but it's not something that we've completely cracked the nut on. A lot of rural communities are looking at PFAS treatment. So
Yeah.
we have to treat that water to an even higher standard. And we need to think about how we're going to do that and how we're going to invest. And that's where we need to continue supporting our rural communities with infrastructure funding.
Yeah, I love what you're saying too, because I think it is all about the rural communities. We need to support them all over the state, not just southern Arizona. We have some water issues in western Arizona too, where we need to support the communities that are there and the people who are there. And when you talk about, here's what I want to make sure people understand. When you talk about groundwater and flowing, it's not like you put water in the ground and it flows like a river to point B or point D that's lower down. This takes literally years and years and years and years and years to get where it's going. Am I correct?
Yes, most systems, it's a very slow process. And so I encourage people to think about their garden hose, right? When you turn your garden hose on, it makes a little puddle on the surface,
Yeah.
and then it goes out a little further and it starts to sink in, and it starts to sink in, and it starts to sink in. And you can see how long would it take with your garden hose to even get 10 feet away, right?
Yeah.
And it depends
Yeah.
on the condition of your soil. If you have driven on the ground a lot and it's really compact, it's going to go farther out before it starts going all the way deep down.
Right.
So different sand, if you turn it on sand, that looks very different than if you do a silt or a really tight soil. So different aquifer conditions occur across these areas. And so that's where we bring in tools like modeling to look at what do we know about the soil? What do we know about infiltration rates? Where can we put this water to have the most benefit?
And is it fair to say the San Pedro, where it I'll say peaks out, but where it's flowing, and it flows a lot in southern Arizona, and not so much as it gets north toward the Gila River. But is it fair to say that that almost represents the top or the close to the top of the aquifer in that area, or is that just me making it up?
No, I mean, essentially that's where it's coming out. And there's a couple things that happen when you see water on the surface. But in those places where you're kind of walking along the river, that's that local aquifer that's coming to the surface and emerging and then flowing downstream. And that local aquifer can be fed by these really deep systems, and sometimes it's fed by a really shallow local aquifer. So on Saturday, I had the chance to actually walk through the San Pedro River, and it was flowing quite nicely. A lot of water actually got wet up to my knees. There were kids swimming under the bridge
Wow.
there at Charleston near Tombstone. And that's because we had all that really great rain a couple weeks ago, where we got rain over multiple days.
Right.
And that water sinks into the ground, and that ground we call it soil moisture storage.
Yeah.
It's stored there next to the river and it slowly leaks back into the river. So, if you can order the rain, just have it come at a nice light intensity so that it can sink into the ground and fill that soil next to the river. And that's like a little sponge that then acts to keep that river flowing. So we need to have both that local soil storage as well as those deeper aquifers emerging up.
Kim Schonek is with the Nature Conservancy. And Kim, I've also read about different things that people do with drier rivers around the country, and I have no idea if it's being done down there. They talk about beavers. Have beavers been used down there and all to try to slow the water?
Yeah, so there's a few different groups working on beaver dam analogs or BDAs,
Okay.
and that's really taking poles and putting them out across the river or rock structures and trying to slow that water down. So you're really thinking about it in terms of beavers build these dams, and so
Right.
you want to recreate that, and that allows water to sink into the banks again and sink back slowly into the river. So that's happening in the Baba Kamari, which is a big tributary to the San Pedro.
Hmm.
Not so much in the main stem itself right now, but definitely something people are looking at.
And what about again, I read also about rock dams or not dams, but more like rock groupings that can slow the water down. I'm probably using the wrong term. Is that being used?
Yeah, we call them one rock dams or process-based restoration.
Hmm.
And so that is another way that we can again slow water down. And just out of Tucson, the Altar Valley is a wonderful example of how that's worked in Arizona to slow that water down, improve that grass that we see, and improve our riparian conditions. So definitely something that's happening throughout, again, the Baba Kamari, Canelo, Hills. So a lot of places that's happening across Southern Arizona Sky Island Alliance, Borderlands Restoration Network, Watershed Management Group. These are all groups really working on getting this on the ground and working in partnership with the Nature Conservancy to identify where we can do more of this work and how do we get that action to take place at a broad scale.
So, Kim, we've just met and over Zoom, of course, and you seem like a pretty positive person. So, do you think that that we can? Well, I'll just put it bluntly: can we save the San Pedro or make it better?
Yes, I think so. I always believe that we can keep working. When when I'm out there at the river and I see kids swimming and I see people walking their dogs, right? Those are people that care. Those are people that want to do something. And so, that's how we're going to get there. And I think people need to go out and experience these places. We have a wide range of events planned in November as part of our Bio Blitz is what we're calling
Oh,
it.
cool.
And so we want people to go out in November and tell us what they're seeing at the river. Tell us what kind of animals, what kind of plants, what do they see? And that's important, but also seeing the commitment of Sierra Vista and Bisbee and Cochise County, Fort Huachuca. Those are really big investments that these communities are making to protect that river, and they're not always going to get it right, and there's going to be a struggle. But they have been committed for 25 years to this partnership that we've seen in the upper San Pedro and in the lower San Pedro. And so I think we're going to be, it's going to be hard. We need to invest, we need to focus, but I think we can do it.
Well, and is it true that it's the San Pedro is the last undammed desert river in the Southwest? I've read that. Is that true?
I think that is a true statistic.
Okay.
I've not investigated it extensively, but there are
Yeah.
no dams on the San Pedro
No, they're
River,
not.
which is great. And we do see, in the Verde, there's two dams.
Yeah.
Santa Cruz has dams as well.
Yep.
So, it is an amazing river. It's absolutely gorgeous. I really encourage people to get out and explore it.
We are going to end on a positive note because I'm going to let you do that because you're so positive. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you. I read an article which was titled, and it was about the San Pedro, A River No More. And its concern was that whatever its point was at current rates or whatever, if we don't do anything about it, that we could lose the river by the end of the century. Now, you seem to be telling us, no, we can't. We don't have to accept a river no more. We can change that and make that a river forever.
Yes, we need to invest, we need to collaborate, and we need to find solutions so that our children's children have a river to go swim in.
Kim, thank you very much for the time. I love talking to you. I'm sure that we'll be talking again, and maybe sometime when I get down to the Santa Cruz, you can take me on a little tour and show me some of the highlights down there. That'd be cool.
Definitely. Anytime, Royal. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.